It was a cold afternoon in London. The kind of day where the wind cuts through your coat and makes you wish you'd stayed inside. But thousands of tourists had gathered near the palace gates anyway. They came to see the royal guards, the men in red uniforms and tall black hats, the soldiers who stood perfectly still, no matter what. Among the crowd was a man named Ryan. He was 28 years old, visiting from America. He wore a leather jacket and had a camera in his hand. But Ryan wasn't like the other tourists. He didn't just want to take pictures. He wanted attention. He wanted to make a video that would go viral. Something wild. Something nobody had ever done before. Ryan walked closer to one of the guards. The soldier sat on a massive black horse. The animal was calm, but its eyes watched everything. The guard's face was stone. No emotion. No movement. Just duty, Ryan smiled. He turned to his friend who was filming. "Watch this," he said. "Before you go any further into this story, make sure you're subscribed to our channel and hit that bell icon so you never miss stories like this one. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next." Ryan stepped even closer. The crowd started to notice. Some people whispered. Others pulled out their phones. Ryan's friend kept the camera rolling. Ryan reached out his hand, slowly. Then he pushed the horse's chest. Not hard, but enough. Enough to make the animal shift its weight. Enough to cross a line. The horse's ears flicked back. Its nostrils flared, but it didn't move. Not yet. The guard's eyes stayed forward. His jaw tight. His gloved hands gripped the reins a little harder, but he said nothing. Ryan laughed. He looked at the camera. "See? They can't do anything. They're like statues." He turned back to the horse. And this time, he pushed harder. He used both hands. He shoved the horse's shoulder like it was a joke, like it was a game. That's when everything changed. The horse's eyes went wide. Its head jerked up. The animal let out a loud snort. A warning. The kind of sound that makes your blood go cold. But Ryan didn't stop. He didn't step back. He thought he was in control. Then the guard spoke. His voice was low, calm, but it carried a weight that made everyone around them go silent. Step away from the horse. Now, Ryan froze. For the first time, he felt something. Not fear, not yet, but something close. He looked up at the guard. The man's face was still blank. But his eyes were different now. They were sharp, focused, like a predator locked onto prey. Ryan's friend lowered the camera slightly. The crowd went quiet. Even the wind seemed to stop, and then Ryan made the biggest mistake of his life. He laughed again, and he raised his hand one more time. Before Ryan's hand could touch the horse again, the animal moved. Fast. Faster than anyone expected. The horse reared up on its hind legs. Its front hooves lifted high into the air. The crowd gasped. Some people screamed. Ryan stumbled backward, his arms flying up to protect his face. The guard stayed perfectly balanced in the saddle. His posture never broke. His control over the horse was absolute. This wasn't chaos. This was training. This was discipline. The horse came back down with a heavy thud. Its hooves hit the cobblestone ground so hard the sound echoed through the square. Ryan was on the ground now. He'd tripped over his own feet trying to get away. His camera had fallen. The screen was cracked. His friend was still filming, but his hands were shaking. The crowd had backed up, forming a wide circle around Ryan and the guard. For a moment, nobody moved. Ryan's chest heaved. His heart pounded so loud he could hear it in his ears. He looked up at the guard. The man hadn't moved, hadn't changed his expression. But the message was clear. You were warned. Ryan's pride was bruised worse than his body. He pushed himself to his feet. His jeans were dirty. His hands were scraped, but he was alive. The horse had stopped. The guard had stopped. It could have been so much worse. A police officer appeared from the crowd. He was tall, with a stern face and a radio clipped to his vest. He walked straight toward Ryan. "Sir, you need to come with me." Ryan's face went red. "I didn't do anything wrong." You assaulted a military animal, the officer said. His voice was calm, but firm. That's a crime. You're lucky you're not in a hospital right now. Ryan's friend stopped recording. He shoved the camera into his bag. He looked at Ryan with wide eyes. Dude, we need to go. But it was too late. Another officer had arrived. Ryan's hands were pulled behind his back. He heard the click of handcuffs, cold metal against his wrists. The crowd watched in silence. Some people shook their heads. Others whispered to each other. A few held up their phones, still recording. Ryan felt the weight of 100 eyes on him. The shame burned hotter than the embarrassment. This wasn't the viral moment he'd imagined. This wasn't fame. This was humiliation. The officers led him away from the square. The guard on the horse still hadn't moved. He stayed at his post. His duty hadn't changed. But the horse seemed calmer now. It lowered its head slightly. Its breathing slowed. The guard reached down and patted the animal's neck, just once. A silent thank you. Ryan was put into the back of a police car. The door slammed shut. Through the window, he could still see the crowd. Still see the guard? The moment replayed in his mind. The horse rearing up, the hooves in the air, the sound of them crashing down. What had he been thinking? The car started moving. Ryan stared at his reflection in the window. His face looked pale. His eyes looked empty. He thought about his family back home. His mother. His younger sister. What would they think when they saw the video? Because the video was already out there. His friend had been streaming it live. It was already spreading. The police station was cold and gray. Ryan sat in a small room with no windows. A detective came in and sat across from him. She was older, with sharp eyes and a known-sense attitude. She placed a folder on the table between them. Do you understand what you did today? She asked. Ryan didn't answer right away. He didn't know what to say. You interfered with a working military animal, she continued. You put yourself in danger. You disrespected a national symbol. And you did it all for what? Internet views? Ryan's throat felt tight. He looked down at his hands. I didn't think it would. You didn't think? She interrupted. That's the problem. The silence that followed was heavier than anything Ryan had ever felt. Ryan sat in that cold room for what felt like hours. The detective left him alone with his thoughts. And those thoughts were dark. He thought about the horse. The way its eyes had gone wide. The way it had reared up, powerful and terrifying. He thought about the guard. The man who never flinched. Who stayed calm even when chaos erupted around him. Ryan had wanted to prove something. That the guards were just for show. That the rules didn't apply to him. That he could do whatever he wanted and walk away with a great story. But now, sitting in a police station with his wrists still sore from the handcuffs, he realized how wrong he'd been. The detective came back. She sat down and opened the folder. Inside were printed screenshots from the video. Ryan's face. The horse. The moment of impact. This video has been viewed over 2 million times in the last 3 hours, she said. Ryan's stomach dropped. People are angry, she continued. Very angry. You're being called a lot of things online right now. None of them are good. Ryan closed his eyes. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He'd imagined people laughing, sharing his video, calling him bold, calling him funny. Instead, they were calling him reckless, disrespectful, dangerous. What happens now? He asked quietly. The detective leaned back in her chair. You'll be charged. Assaulting a military animal is a serious offense. You could face jail time or a very large fine. It depends on the judge. It also depends on you, on me, on whether you understand what you did wrong, she said, and whether you're willing to make it right. Ryan didn't know what that meant, but he nodded anyway. He was released later that evening. No jail, not yet. But he had to stay in London. He couldn't leave the country until his court date. His friend had already flown home. He didn't want to be part of the fallout. Ryan couldn't blame him. That night, Ryan sat alone in his hotel room. His phone was flooded with notifications, messages from strangers, angry comments, threats. People saying he deserved worse than what happened. People saying the horse should have trampled him. He turned the phone off and threw it on the bed. He looked out the window at the city below. The lights glowed in the dark. Somewhere out there, the royal guard was still standing at his post, still doing his duty, still protecting something bigger than himself. Ryan had never thought about it that way before. He'd only seen the uniform, the tradition, the spectacle. He hadn't seen the sacrifice, the discipline, the respect that came with the role. The next morning, Ryan did something unexpected. He went back to the palace. Not to cause trouble, not to film anything. He stood at the edge of the crowd, watching the guards, watching the horses. This time, he didn't laugh. He didn't reach out. He just watched. One of the guards was different today. A younger man on a brown horse, but the same stillness, the same focus. A little girl walked up to the horse with her father. She held out her hand carefully. The father spoke quietly to her, gentle. Always be gentle, the guard allowed it. The little girl touched the horse's nose. She giggled. Her father smiled. And the guard, just for a second, softened his expression. Ryan felt something crack inside his chest. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pride. It was regret. Deep, heavy regret. That afternoon, Ryan walked into a cafe near the palace. He ordered a coffee and sat by the window. A woman in her 50s sat down at the table next to him. She had kind eyes and a warm smile. She noticed Ryan staring out at the palace gates. "First time in London?" she asked. Ryan hesitated. Then he shook his head. "No. Second time, actually." She nodded. "It's a beautiful city. Full of history. Full of respect." There was something in the way she said that word. Respect. Like it meant more than he'd ever understood. "Do you know much about the royal guards?" he asked. Her smile faded just a little. "I do," she said. "My son was one." "Was?" She nodded slowly. Her eyes grew distant, and that's when Ryan realized. She wasn't just any stranger. The woman's name was Margaret. She had soft gray hair and hands that trembled slightly when she lifted her cup of tea. She looked at Ryan with eyes that had seen pain. The kind of pain that never fully goes away. "My son's name was Thomas," she said quietly. "He served as a royal guard for 6 years. It was his dream since he was a boy. He loved the discipline, the honor, the tradition." Ryan didn't know what to say. He felt like he shouldn't be hearing this, like he didn't deserve to. "What happened to him?" Ryan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Margaret smiled, but it was sad, bittersweet. "He was deployed overseas, Afghanistan. He didn't come home." The words hung in the air between them. Ryan's chest tightened. He thought about the guard from yesterday, the man who had stayed so calm, so controlled, even when Ryan had disrespected everything he stood for. "I'm sorry," Ryan said, and he meant it. Margaret nodded. "Thank you. It's been 5 years now, but I still come here sometimes. To watch the guards, it makes me feel close to him, like he's still standing there doing what he loved." Ryan looked down at his hands. They were still scraped from the fall. "I did something terrible yesterday," he said. Margaret tilted her head. "What do you mean?" Ryan told her everything. How he'd pushed the horse. How he'd laughed. How the horse had reared up and the guard had stayed so calm. How he'd been arrested. How the video had gone viral. How millions of people were calling him names. How he deserved all of it. Margaret listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "You made a mistake," she said. "A big one. But mistakes don't define us. What we do after them does." Ryan looked up at her. There were tears in his eyes now. He hadn't cried in years. But sitting there, across from a woman who had lost her son, a son who had served with honor, Ryan felt the weight of what he'd done. "I don't know how to make it right," he said. "You start by understanding why it was wrong," Margaret said. "Those guards aren't just men in uniforms. They represent something. Sacrifice, duty, respect, and the horses. They're not props. They're partners. They trust the guards, and the guards trust them. When you hurt that trust, you hurt something sacred. Ryan wiped his eyes. I didn't think about it like that. Most people don't, she said gently. But now you do. So what will you do with that knowledge? Ryan didn't have an answer. Not yet. Margaret finished her tea and stood up. She placed a hand on Ryan's shoulder. Come with me, she said. Ryan followed her out of the cafe. She led him down the street, past the palace gates, to a small memorial tucked away in a quiet corner. It was a stone wall with names carved into it. Hundreds of names. Soldiers who had served, soldiers who had died. Margaret ran her fingers over one name. Thomas Ashford. Her son. This is what those guards are protecting, she said. Not just the palace. Not just tradition. They're protecting the memory of people like my Thomas. People who gave everything. Ryan stared at the wall. At the names. At the weight of history carved into stone. He thought about the guard from yesterday. The man who had stayed so calm. So professional. Even when Ryan had tried to humiliate him. I need to apologize, Ryan said suddenly. Margaret looked at him. To who? To the guard. To the horse. To everyone, Margaret smiled. A real smile this time. That's a good start. The next day, Ryan went back to the palace. But this time, he didn't go alone. He brought flowers, white roses, and he brought a letter. He'd stayed up all night writing it. It was an apology. A real one. Not for the cameras, not for the internet, but for himself. He asked one of the officers if he could deliver it to the guard from the incident. The officer looked at him with suspicion at first, but when he saw the flowers, the letter, the look in Ryan's eyes, he nodded. I'll make sure he gets it, the officer said. Ryan handed over the letter. His hands shook. He didn't know if the guard would read it. He didn't know if it would make any difference. But he had to try. As he walked away, he felt lighter. Not forgiven. Not yet. But lighter. Like he'd taken the first step on a long road. And somewhere, behind the palace walls, the guard opened the letter. The guard's name was Daniel. He was 32 years old. He'd been serving for 10 years. He'd stood in the rain, in the snow, in the burning summer heat. He'd been yelled at, mocked, and photographed thousands of times. But he never broke. That was the job. That was the promise he'd made. When the officer handed him the letter, Daniel was in the stable. He'd just finished brushing down his horse, a massive black gelding named Samson, the same horse from the incident. Samson had been restless that day. Nervous, Daniel had felt it through the reins. The animal had sensed danger before Daniel had even processed it. Daniel sat down on a bench and opened the letter. His hand still wearing the white gloves, carefully unfolded the paper. He read slowly. The letter started with 2 words. I'm sorry. Ryan's handwriting was messy, like he'd been shaking when he wrote it. But the words were clear, honest. He explained everything. How he'd been chasing attention. How he'd been stupid. He hadn't thought about what the uniform meant. What the horse meant. What the tradition represented. He wrote about meeting Margaret. About seeing the memorial wall. About realizing too late that he disrespected something sacred. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't make excuses. He just apologized. From the heart, Daniel read the letter twice. Then he folded it and placed it in his locker. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. But something inside him softened. Just a little. Later that evening, Daniel went home to his small apartment. His wife, Emma, was in the kitchen making dinner. She looked up when he walked in. Rough day? She asked. Daniel shook his head. Not today. Today was different. He told her about the letter, about the flowers, about the young man who'd made a terrible mistake and was trying to make it right. Emma listened, her hands still stirring the pot on the stove. No? Do you think he means it? She asked. Daniel thought about it. I think he does. Are you going to forgive him? Daniel looked out the window. The city lights were beginning to glow in the dusk. I already have, he said quietly. Emma walked over and hugged him. She knew what the job cost him. The hours, the discipline, things people said and did. But she also knew why he did it. Because it mattered. Because honor mattered. Meanwhile, Ryan was preparing for his court date. He'd hired a lawyer, but he wasn't hoping for a miracle. He knew he'd have to face consequences. He deserved them. But he also knew he'd changed. The man who'd pushed that horse wasn't. Same man sitting in the courtroom now. The judge was an older woman, with gray hair and reading glasses. She reviewed the case with a stern expression. The prosecution laid out the facts. The video was shown in court. Ryan watched himself on the screen, laughing, pushing, being reckless. Felt sick. When it was his turn to speak, Ryan stood. His voice was steady, but his hands were shaking. Your Honor, I don't have an excuse for what I did. I was selfish. I was ignorant. I disrespected something I didn't understand. But I've learned. I've met people who helped me see what I couldn't see before. I know I have to face the consequences, and I will. But I also want to do more than that. I want to make sure this doesn't happen again. Not by me. Not by anyone. The judge looked at him over her glasses. What do you mean by that? Ryan took a deep breath. I want to create a video. A real one. Not for views. Not for fame. But to educate people. To show them what those guards really represent. To show them why respect matters. I want to turn my mistake into something that helps others learn. The courtroom was silent. The judge leaned back in her chair. She looked at the screen, then at Ryan, then at the report in front of her. You're facing a fine of £10,000, she said, and 100 hours of community service. Well, serve that time working with organizations that support military families. You'll also create the educational content you described, and it will be reviewed before it's published. Ryan nodded. Yes, Your Honor, thank you. The gavel came down. The case was closed. Ryan walked out of the courtroom feeling something he hadn't felt in days. Relief. Not because he'd gotten off easy, but because he'd been given a chance to do better. Over the next 3 months, Ryan worked harder than he ever had. He volunteered at veteran support centers. He listened to stories from soldiers and their families. He learned about sacrifice, about duty, about the cost of service, and he filmed everything. Not for entertainment, but for education. He interviewed Margaret. She told Thomas's story. She talked about what it meant to lose a son who'd served his country. She talked about the pride she still felt, even through the pain. Ryan also reached out to Daniel. At first, Daniel declined. But after some time, he agreed to meet. They sat in the same cafe where Ryan had met Margaret, and they talked, not as enemies, but as two men trying to understand each other. I judged you, Daniel said. That day I thought you were just another foolish tourist, but you've proven me wrong. Ryan shook his head. You had every right to judge me. I was foolish. But you're not anymore, Daniel said. And for the first time, he smiled. The video Ryan created wasn't flashy. It wasn't edited for virality. It was simple, honest, powerful. It showed the guards, the horses, the families, the sacrifice, and it showed Ryan's journey. His mistake, his lessons, his change. When the video was published, it didn't get millions of views in one day, but it spread slowly, steadily. People shared it, teachers used it in classrooms, veteran organizations praised it, and most importantly, it made people think. Ryan never became famous, but he became something better. He became someone who understood the weight of respect. 1 year later, Ryan returned to London. This time, it wasn't for a court date. It wasn't because he had to. It was because he wanted to. He'd kept in touch with Margaret. They'd exchanged letters and emails. She'd become something like a mentor to him. A reminder of why his change mattered. Ryan stood outside the palace gates on a crisp autumn morning. The leaves were turning gold and orange. The air smelled like rain. Tourists filled the square, taking pictures, laughing, pointing at the guards. But Ryan noticed something different now. Most of them kept their distance. Most of them were respectful. A few even bowed their heads slightly as they passed. Maybe the video had helped. Maybe people were learning. Or maybe they'd always known and just needed a reminder. Daniel was on duty that day. Ryan spotted him from across the square. Same red uniform. Same black horse. Samson. The horse looked older now, a little gray around the muzzle, but still strong. Still proud, Ryan didn't approach. He didn't wave. He just watched. And he smiled. Because this time, he understood what he was looking at. Not a tourist attraction. Not a living statue. But a man doing something bigger than himself. A man standing for honor, for tradition, for memory. After his shift, Daniel walked Samson back to the stables. He removed the saddle and bridle, brushed the horse down, and fed him a handful of carrots. Samson nudged Daniel's shoulder with his nose. A gesture of trust, of partnership. "Good boy," Daniel whispered. "You've earned your rest." As Daniel left the stables, he saw someone waiting outside. "Ryan," Daniel stopped. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Daniel walked over and extended his hand. Ryan shook it. His grip was firm, respectful. "I didn't think I'd see you again," Daniel said. "I had to come back," Ryan said. "To see it again? The right way." Daniel nodded. "You've done good work. I saw the video. So did a lot of the other guards. It meant something." Ryan's throat tightened. "I'm glad. I wanted it to mean something. I wanted to fix what I broke." "You can't fix the past," Daniel said. "But you can shape the future. And you did that." Stood there for a moment. Two men who'd been on opposite sides of a terrible moment, now standing as something close to friends. "Can I ask you something?" Ryan said, "Go ahead." "That day, when I pushed Samson, did you want to hurt me?" Daniel thought about it. "No," he said. "I wanted to stop you. I wanted to protect my horse, but I didn't want to hurt you. That's not what we do. We're trained to stay calm, to keep control, even when everything around us is chaos." Ryan nodded slowly. "That's what I didn't understand. I thought you were just for show. But you're not. You're real. The job is real. The sacrifice is real." "It is," Daniel said. "And it always has been." Before Ryan left London that day, he made one more stop. He went to the memorial wall, where Margaret had taken him a year ago. He found Thomas's name again. And this time, he placed a single white rose beneath it. "Thank you," he whispered, "for teaching me what I didn't know." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and autumn leaves. Ryan stood there for a long time, thinking, remembering, grateful. When he finally walked away, he didn't look back, because he'd learned something important. You don't move forward by dwelling on the past. You move forward by honoring it, by learning from it, by being better because of it. Ryan went home to America. He continued to volunteer. He spoke at schools about respect and responsibility. He never became a celebrity. He never went viral again. But he touched lives, one conversation at a time. One story at a time. Margaret still visited the palace every month. She still watched the guards. And every time she did, she thought about her son, about the man he'd been, about the sacrifice he'd made. And she thought about Ryan, the young man who'd made a terrible mistake, but had turned it into something meaningful. Daniel continued to serve, year after year, until the day he retired. On his last day, he stood at his post one final time. Samson had retired 2 years earlier, living peacefully in a countryside stable. But Daniel could still feel the weight of the reins in his hands, the steady rhythm of the horse beneath him. When his shift ended, Daniel saluted. The crowd applauded. Some people cried, because they understood now more than ever what it meant to serve with honor. That night, Daniel went home to Emma. They sat on the couch, her head on his shoulder, and watched the sunset through the window. "No regrets?" she asked. Daniel smiled. "None." Years later, Ryan's daughter asked him about the scar on his hand, the one from when he'd fallen on the cobblestones. Ryan sat her down and told her the story. Not to brag, not to entertain, but to teach. "I made a mistake," he said. "A big one. But I learned from it. And that's what I want you to remember. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do next." His daughter looked up at him with wide eyes. Did the guard forgive you? Ryan nodded. He did. But more importantly, I learned to forgive myself, and I promised to do better. That's what honor is. It's not about being perfect. It's about trying. Every single day, his daughter hugged him, and Ryan held her tight, grateful for the lessons he'd learned, grateful for the people who'd taught him, grateful for the second chance he'd been given. The story of the man who tried to knock over a royal guard's horse could have ended in tragedy. It could have ended in bitterness and anger, but instead, it ended in growth, in respect, in understanding, because sometimes the worst moments in our lives become the best teachers, and the people we wrong become the ones who save us. That's the power of honor. That's the power of change. And that's the power of a second chance.